The first night in his new Seattle apartment, Ethan Miller learned something important and uncomfortable. The walls were thin enough to carry a stranger's life straight into his bedroom at 11:17 p.m. Just as the city outside settled into a low hum, a chair scraped softly against the wall beside his bed. Not a loud sound, not careless. The kind of sound someone makes when they think no one is listening. Ethan froze, phone in hand, suddenly aware that he wasn't alone the way he thought he was. A minute later came a slow breath. Then another. Then music. It wasn't loud or sharp. It drifted through the wall like a memory-soft piano notes, careful and steady, as if the player was afraid of pressing too hard. Ethan sat up in bed, confused by how quickly the sound reached him. He told himself it was temporary. Old building. First, night nerves. He would get used to it. But he didn't sleep. Ethan had moved to Seattle for silence. That was the lie he told people. The truth was heavier. His engagement had ended 6 months earlier, not with a fight, but with a quiet conversation that changed everything. Two people sitting at a kitchen table, realizing love could still exist without a future. He packed his life into boxes and drove west, hoping distance would dull the ache. Instead, the thin walls gave it a voice. The second night, the sounds returned right on time. The same chair. The same piano. This time, Ethan stayed still, listening without meaning to. He noticed how the music slowed near the end, like the person next door hesitated to stop playing. When the last note faded, there was a long silence. Then a sigh that carried more weight than sound ever should. Ethan stared at the wall, feeling something unexpected stir inside him. Recognition. He knew that sigh. By the third night. He wasn't pretending anymore. He brushed his teeth early. He dimmed the lights. He waited. The building itself felt older at night, like it had seen many people come and go, all carrying their private heartbreaks through the same narrow halls. Ethan imagined his neighbor for the first time, not clearly, but enough to make her real. A woman, he thought. Early 30s maybe. Someone who stayed up late because sleep asked questions. She wasn't ready to answer. He didn't know why he was sure it was a woman. He just was. The sounds weren't constant. There were no parties, no guests, no loud television. Instead, there were moments. A phone vibrating on a hard surface. Soft footsteps pacing. A quiet okay whispered into the air. Followed by silence instead of another voice. Ethan learned her routine without ever seeing her face. Sunday mornings meant coffee grinding early, sharp and sudden. Wednesday nights meant long phone calls that ended without goodbyes. Every night meant music. He told himself to stop listening. He didn't, single quotes T during the day. Ethan worked remotely from a small desk near the window. He answered emails, joined meetings, smiled when expected. No one knew that at night, his world shrank to the space between his bed and the wall they shared. The wall that turned a stranger into someone familiar. One evening, while heating leftover soup, he heard laughter. It caught him off guard. It wasn't loud or carefree. It was quick, surprised, like it slipped out before the person could stop it. Ethan leaned against the counter, smiling before he realized he was doing it. The laugh faded, followed by the sound of someone clearing their throat, as if embarrassed to be happy alone. That was the night he first thought about knocking. He stood in the hallway, beside his apartment, keys still in his hand, staring at the door next to his. The number on it meant nothing to him. The name inside meant even less. He raised his hand, then lowered it. What would he say? Sorry, I've been listening to your life through the wall. He went back inside. Days passed. Weeks, even. The city grew familiar. The coffee shop on the corner learned his order. The rain stopped, surprising him. But the nights stayed the same. The sounds stayed close. Ethan noticed changes. The music became less steady. The phone calls grew shorter. Some nights, the pacing lasted longer than the piano. He imagined her walking back and forth, arms crossed, replaying words she wished she'd said differently. He knew that walk too. Once, late at night, he heard crying. Not loud, not messy, just a quiet release, like someone finally letting go after holding it together all day. Ethan sat on the floor with his back against the wall, feeling helpless and strangely connected. He didn't know her name. He didn't know her story. But he knew that sound. It sounded like the end of something. Ethan began timing his evenings around hers without thinking. He delayed showers. He washed dishes slowly. He sat on the couch longer than he needed to. Not because he wanted to hear more, because he didn't want the sounds to stop. Silence had become the enemy. He told himself this was temporary, that soon he would meet someone, make friends, build a life that didn't depend on a stranger's routine. But each night, when the piano started, his chest loosened just a little dot. It meant she was still there. One Thursday night, everything changed. The chair scraped across the floor, but the music didn't follow. Instead, there was a sharp inhale. A drawer slammed shut. Footsteps moved faster than usual, back and forth, restless. Ethan stood in his living room, his heart beating harder than it should have. Then came a sound he hadn't heard before, shaky breath that broke halfway through, like someone trying and failing to stay calm. No piano, no phone call, just pacing. Ethan moved closer to the wall, his instincts louder than his logic. He imagined her sitting on the floor, head in her hands, wondering how her life had reached this point. He imagined words spoken earlier that night. Words that couldn't be taken back. The sound stopped suddenly. The silence that followed felt heavier than anything he'd heard before. Minutes passed. Then more. Ethan checked the time. 12:03 a.m. His heart told him to do something. His fear told him not to. He stood there, caught between two doors, his and hers, realizing how thin the line was between strangers and something more. He walked to his front door. His hand hovered over the knob. He listened. Nothing. He pictured her alone in the quiet, staring at a wall that carried nothing back to her. He wondered if she felt as alone as he did when the music wasn't there. Ethan opened his door, stepped into the hallway, and took one step toward hers. Then he stopped. He wasn't ready. Not yet. He went back inside, closing the door gently, like the sound itself might carry. That night, he didn't sleep at all. The next morning, the city looked the same. Cars passed. People hurried. No one knew that two lives were paused on either side of a thin wall. Both waiting for courage, Ethan made coffee and stood by the window, listening for sounds that didn't come. The apartment next door stayed quiet all day, for the first time since he moved in. The wall said nothing, and Ethan realized something that surprised him. More than the sounds ever had. He wasn't afraid of the noise anymore. He was afraid of losing it. The night Ethan finally decided to knock, his hands trembled like they had a life of their own. For weeks, he had lived in the quiet companionship of a wall, hearing someone else's life in fragments, understanding her moods, her silences, her laughter. But tonight, the silence had shifted. It wasn't comforting anymore. It was a weight pressing against him, telling him he couldn't just listen from the shadows any longer. He took a deep breath, clutched the hallway railing for a moment, and let his knuckles meet the wooden door next to his. One knock. Two knocks. Then a pause that made his stomach tighten. For a long moment, nothing happened. Ethan's mind raced, imagining every possible reaction. Would she be angry, confused, afraid? Then came the sound of slow, careful footsteps approaching the door. Each step echoed faintly in the narrow hallway, and his heartbeat echoed louder in his chest. The door opened just a crack, and there she was, Claire Thompson, exactly how he had pictured her in his imagination. Tired eyes, soft features, a sweater that seemed woven from comfort itself. She looked at him with an expression that was part surprise, part cautious curiosity. "Hi," Ethan said, his voice steadier than he felt. "I'm your neighbor, Ethan." "Claire," she replied softly, nodding. There was a brief pause, the kind that could end a conversation before it even started, but neither moved to fill it. The silence wasn't uncomfortable, it was heavy, filled with all the small truths that had traveled through the wall for weeks. Ethan wanted to say something clever, something that would make her smile, but words felt useless here. I wanted to check on you," he finally said. "Last night it sounded like you were upset." Her shoulders relaxed slightly. "That obvious?" she asked, a small, almost embarrassed smile touching her lips. "Only if you're listening," he replied. A flicker of amusement crossed her face. That was the first real connection. It's the first acknowledgement that he hadn't just been intruding into her life through thin walls. He had been seeing her humanity, silently, carefully, and she had been letting him. The door opened wider, and Ethan stepped inside. The apartment was lived in, warm in its own imperfect way, half unpacked boxes. A piano keyboard by the window, a mug left on the counter with a ring of dried coffee. It smelled faintly of cinnamon and paper, comforting in a way that felt intimate without being intrusive. They moved to the couch, sitting at opposite ends, talking about safe things at first: the building, the weather, the neighborhood coffee shop that served the worst espresso in Seattle. Their conversation was cautious, like two dancers finding rhythm in a room where they had once only heard echoes. Then, gradually, the walls between them, metaphorical, not literal, this time started to lower. Claire spoke about her divorce, not as a dramatic confession, but as a quiet recounting of how it had ended and what she had lost. Ethan listened and then shared his story, his broken engagement, the long months of moving through life feeling unmoored, the small, lonely victories that didn't feel like victories at all. The words came easier than he expected. Neither of them rushed, neither pressed. They were building something tentative, raw, and real. The more they talked, the more Ethan realized how much he had relied on the wall to know her. Now, seeing her, hearing her voice without it traveling through plaster and paint, felt like stepping into sunlight after months in shadow. The wall had been a filter, a way to understand without engagement. And now engagement felt frighteningly vivid. As the night deepened, Claire stood and walked over to the piano by the window. "You've been hearing this song," she said, almost shyly. "Every night." Ethan nodded. "I wanted to hear it this way," she played, letting the notes float through the room, filling every empty corner. Ethan sat back on the couch, letting the music wrap around him. It was the same song, the one that had filled his nights with unspoken connection. But now it had a new texture, alive, and undeniably hers. They sat together, the music soft, and neither needed to speak. In those moments, Ethan understood that the connection he had built through walls had been real, even if incomplete. Seeing her sharing the space brought it to life in a way he hadn't dared to imagine. Over the next few weeks, knocking became natural. They discovered routines and habits, slowly integrating their lives without forcing them. Coffee on Sunday mornings became a shared ritual. Evening walks in the city, talking about dreams and regrets, became something they both anticipated. Silence, once a heavy companion through the thin wall, now felt comfortable when shared. Ethan learned to listen differently. Not for signs of distress or loneliness, but for the subtle rhythms of a life that could now exist alongside his own. Claire laughed more freely, and he noticed the way her eyes lit up when she discovered something small and beautiful in the city. Their conversations deepened, shifting from casual observations to hopes, fears, and the kind of honesty that only grows when two people trust that no one is eavesdropping, that no wall separates them. The piano song became a nightly ritual. They shared a thread tying past and present. Sometimes Ethan would play while Claire hummed along. Other nights she would play while he listened, just like he had before, but now intentionally, knowingly, with smiles exchanged instead of walls. One evening, they stood in the hallway between their apartments. The doors open, but bodies just shy of touching. "Funny," Claire said, her voice soft. "For months we were sharing everything without even knowing each other." Ethan nodded, feeling the truth in her words. "Maybe we just needed the wall to fall first," he said. It was not a dramatic declaration. There was no rush, no urgency. Just two people who had been connected through space and sound, finally meeting in full, choosing to be present with each other. Their relationship didn't explode overnight. There were awkward mornings, clumsy goodbyes, disagreements about small things, moments of doubt. But each day, the bond they had built through listening, through waiting, through silent understanding became stronger. It was steady, warm, and human. They didn't need walls to bring them together anymore in time. The walls that had once carried whispers and sighs became irrelevant. The connection, once fragile and mediated through thin plaster, now thrived in sunlight, laughter, and quiet evenings spent together. Every shared cup of coffee, every laugh, every unspoken glance strengthened a bond that had begun in absence, flourished in listening, and matured in presence. Ethan and Claire discovered that love and understanding could begin in the smallest, most subtle ways. Not in grand gestures or dramatic confessions, but in noticing, in patience, and in the courage to step forward when silence could no longer speak for them. The walls had given them a start, but they chose to continue the story together fully, intentionally, and without fear. And as they sat in the shared warmth of an apartment that had once felt lonely on both sides, Ethan realized that some connections don't start with sight or touch, they start with listening, patience, and the quiet bravery to knock on a door.